Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rosefellow Podcast. With me today, I have our guests, Brian Banks, who works with us here at Rosefellow, and Marc Dubé from Colliers, who works with us as well on several projects here at Rosefellow. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Nice to see you guys.
Thank you.
So today we're here to talk about a growing trend that we're seeing in the market, and we think it's relevant to not only just talk about processes and so on. We think it's relevant to talk about buildings and what tenants are expecting today moving forward and where the market is in that regard. So today we're going to be speaking more specifically about environmental certifications, which we think is a topic that is more and more relevant in today's marketplace and context. So with that, let's jump right in. We often speak about the fact that Rosefellow builds Class A buildings. Marc, what do you consider Class A buildings?
Well, that's changed over since the start of my career when, Class A was probably 24 feet clear. Now I think Class A is anywhere between 32 to 40 feet clear. But tenants are looking for all kinds of different things. Over the years, it's always been number of doors. The door ratio keeps going down and down. We used to have on a 100,000 square foot building, it would be nice to have, 6, 7 doors. Now people want 15 doors on 100,000 square feet. We're looking at clear heights and truck courts and trailer parking. But one of the things that we're starting to see a lot of demand now is energy efficiency. And I think that's really being pushed towards the definition of what a Class A building is. I mean, Brian, you probably are more of an expert than I am in this, but the demand now for energy efficiency, different lighting is really key.
Absolutely. So that's one thing we're doing at Rosefellow is a lot of carbon zero certified buildings. We're doing LEED buildings. So maybe I'll jump in and just talk about what the difference between those are.
Good idea.
So LEED is a rating system that kind of evaluates how sustainable a building is. It's really a point system that touches different criteria such as location, type of site, energy efficiency, materials, lighting, There are points in there that don't cross over to carbon zero. So, for example, water savings, light pollution, transportation. So you have more of these like social and environmental criteria in LEED that we don't see in carbon zero. So that's one system. And then carbon zero is completely different. It's really more focused on, of course, carbon. We're trying to reduce the embodied carbon, and we're trying to reduce the energy consumed.
So, question from my end, because from the tenant perspective, from industrial tenants, we're not getting a lot of requests for LEED anymore. We don't really even hear LEED, but people are really talking a lot about carbon net zero.
So yeah, there's a lot more advantage for a tenant being in a carbon zero building because of the energy savings. What we're doing to achieve carbon zero design is really an increase in the envelope, the R values on the roof, the walls. We're looking at R40 roofs, 4-inch IMP walls. So really trying to reduce the energy demand of the building by doing so. And then we're putting high energy efficient ventilation systems, energy recovery ventilators. We're doing rooftop heat pumps to reduce our gas consumption. So now we're using electricity. We're lucky in Quebec, we have a green electricity. So we're reducing the carbon footprint in that sense as well. And overall, what this does, it gives the tenant a huge advantage in energy savings. We're talking 30 to 40% energy savings in a building.
Yeah, that's material. So, Brian, just for another term, not to complicate things, but something that we often hear as well in today's construction standards is net zero ready.
Yes.
So what's the difference, now that we understand the difference between LEED and net zero, where does net zero ready fall?
Net zero ready means you're not meeting all the requirements to be net zero certified. Maybe you've only boosted your envelope, so higher R values, but you don't have the heat recovery ventilators, or you don't have the rooftop heat pumps. So you have a smaller electrical entrance, and that's why it's done typically. But it's hard to get the electrical demand required for a carbon zero certified building. You'll do carbon zero ready, and you'll provision for the upgrades in the future. So we'll make the electrical room bigger. We'll do, space outside for the extra electrical equipment as well, and we'll do the envelope upgrades.
So correct me if I'm wrong, in that case, it is easy to a certain degree, of course, to take a net zero ready building and convert it to net zero.
Yes, a lot easier than a standard building. Because a standard building, to upgrade it to carbon zero is going to be a challenge because of the envelope. An existing building can still become carbon zero certified based on a performance criteria. It's a different type of certification where they do an annual revision of your energy consumption, and you essentially have to buy carbon offsets to read that performance criteria.
So you're not really making the building itself. No. You're
paying.
You're taxing yourself to be able to say that just to get the designation, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Understood. So from our perspective, the demand from tenants or even from landlords, we're not really seeing that demand of or the concept of bringing older buildings into carbon certified, carbon zero certified. Yeah. I mean, some of our buildings in Montreal don't even have insulation. So, I mean, it's pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And based on the investment that's going to be required, it's going to have a material impact, on what tenants have to pay to be in that building once those conversions are done, right? As opposed to starting fresh and being able to build in those savings from day one that Brian just referred to, which are material. And I think to your point, Marc, I'm noticing that a lot of tenants like the idea and like the sound of net zero and like the sound of LEED and so on, but they don't really know what it means. Like you said earlier, they don't really know why it's good for them, aside from just being able to tick the box from a governance perspective. I think it's important, especially that people like ourselves make sure that the tenants don't necessarily compare apples with apples, because at the end of the day, our product versus an existing product, you have to be able to take into consideration what those energy savings are for you to get a global picture as to what your gross occupancy cost is going to be.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there, and we're seeing that. So as you guys are aware, we have a major project that we're working with Rosefellow and Bentall Green Oak, buildings out in Beauharnois. One building, very large buildings totaling, almost 900,000 square feet. Building A is carbon ready, carbon zero ready. Building B is carbon zero certified. And, they're brand new buildings, 40 feet clear, state of the art, highway fronting, fantastic buildings. And when we talk to people about the impact of the energy savings, people aren't really aware. Dave, like you said, they love the concept of saying, well, we're in a carbon zero building. They don't really know what it means, and they don't really know what the energy savings are or what it means to the bottom line. So you could actually be paying extra on your rent, but you're saving so much money on your energy. Like, I think for building B, which is certified zero, we're talking about 45 going close to 50% on energy savings.
It's huge
to an existing or a standard construction.
Yeah. So what we do is we compare it to a standard building, also built today. So same building built to today's norms and codes, but not carbon zero certified. That's what we're comparing it to, which is still a pretty good building compared to some of the older ones in Montreal, like you mentioned before, that don't have insulation.
Right.
So our baseline comparison is already a good starting point. If you compare it to one of those even older buildings, it's night and day, the cost savings.
So for Beauharnois, we actually we chose to make a brand new flyer, which is really all about the carbon zero, because we wanted to educate the tenants.
Yep.
Because the good news is that we're actually not charging extra for it. We're really working with that construction, so all those savings are just going to be passed right on to the tenants, which is I think a fantastic platform from a leasing perspective. But it's still, I guess, maybe because it's a bit in the infancy. I mean, we've been seeing this trend going on for 5 years, maybe.
Yep.
Right. So I think tenants are still unaware of that, the unbelievable impact that these savings have on their bottom line and on their occupancy costs.
And it's something that really advantages them. It's a big investment by Rosefellow and Bentall Green Oak. Like, when we do these carbon zero buildings, it's $5 to $7 a square foot more in construction.
Wow.
And the advantage goes...
It's impactful.
the advantage goes to the tenant at the end of the day because of the energy savings.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that was one of the questions that I want to ask is what's the delta between, construction on a standard building versus one of these energy efficient buildings. And I think another misconception that we see oftentimes, Marc, and I'd like for you to speak about it, that we see in the market is oftentimes when it comes up, a lot of tenants' knee-jerk reaction is it's going to be too expensive.
Right.
It's it costs so much more to build and so on. And obviously when you consider the global cost around a project, and Brian referencing $5 to $7 a foot, we're talking about an increase in cost of maybe 5%.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Especially in today's construction numbers.
Exactly.
Look, I think that, as you said, knee-jerk reaction comes a lot from the days of LEED. And when LEED was implemented, or was, I guess, the trend in Montreal, probably 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was very expensive to have a LEED industrial building in comparison to what would have been a standard building at that time. So I think tenants today still have that in their mind, that they were paying for this certification and really weren't necessarily feeling that they were getting all the advantages that you would get today from going into that carbon net zero. But funny enough, we're actually still today not getting a lot of demand from tenants saying we absolutely need to have this. So we're working hard to really explain the values of this. And how many square feet is Rosefellow doing now?
So we've completed 2.2 million square feet of carbon zero certified buildings.
Wow.
And we have another 2 million coming up very soon.
So I think, the demand that we're seeing that actually are requesting carbon net zero, there's a couple of reasons. There's much larger firms, whether it be from Canada or the United States. We're seeing a lot more of those firms that have it as part of their ESG programs, right?
Absolutely.
And they will not sign a lease unless it is carbon net zero. And those are mostly Fortune 500 companies. But for the smaller occupiers, if you're going to occupy 400,000 square feet, by no means are you a smaller occupier, but you may not be a Fortune 500 company. They're not so concerned about the label. They're more concerned about their total occupancy cost on an annual basis. So that's where, our job is really to educate these tenants and show them, hey, this is how much money you could be saving. So you may be paying $1 less in a building down the road that's not carbon net zero, but we're going to be saving you, $2 a foot on energy costs. That's where it gets tricky. But I think the trend is here. I think the trend is going to continue. And moreover than just the tenants, we're actually seeing that demand coming from institutional pension funds, investors. They're not interested in buying anything unless it's carbon net zero. It's become a criteria. There are banks now that are starting to move towards we only want to lend on carbon net zero.
Yep.
So, I think it's here to stay.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so do I. And you know what, to your point, I think that, when LEED came out, it was interesting because, like you were referencing, Brian, LEED was essentially kind of the wellness and so on and so forth and ticking the box on different elements. But when you think about it, tenants they wanted to be in a LEED building, but then there were standards to make your premises LEED. And I have yet to find one tenant who has gone out of their way to build their premises LEED. And the difference in my opinion, is that with net zero, what's very interesting about it is that it's the building's performance, right? So the actual impact on the environment is measurable, and you see it. It's real, and you see it on the energy savings, as you mentioned. But you also see municipalities that are encouraging it, right? I think at the end of the day, and that trickles down from the provincial and federal governments that want to see these types of programs implemented for the obvious reasons, whether it's, the discussion about global warming, whether it's, like I said, municipalities being in a position to say that they're actively trying to pursue these types of initiatives. But I also think what we're seeing is that it does have a top-down effect where you referenced the Fortune 500 companies and so on. I know for a fact, and I'm sure, Marc, you can speak to it in more detail, that you'll find organizations now that have been obviously moving towards this ESG initiative, and that starts with, trucking. They want to know more of going towards an EV or a hybrid-centric approach as opposed to gas-fueled vehicles. And basically, the message that I've received from those types of institutional tenants is it's only a question of time before we expect that across the board on our real estate.
You're 100% right. I mean, we're even seeing in leases now from institutional owners where they're putting in clauses that have to do with future ESG or environmental initiatives, so that they'll have the right to do things to the building that will bring it closer to be more environmentally friendly. So we're really seeing a shift in mindset. That's affecting affecting occupancy for everybody. And to your comment before where you were talking about municipalities, like I believe that even municipalities are now starting to move towards only approving projects that have carbon zero or some form of whether certified or ready, but that you can't just get a permit to go put up a standard building anymore.
No, for example, Saint Laurent requires all new constructions to be LEED certified at a minimum. And there are some municipalities, and this is another advantage to the tenants, some cities are giving tax subsidies for these carbon zero buildings.
So you're getting the savings on the energy, you're getting the savings on the taxes.
Yep.
So you're golden for at least 5 years, right?
Yeah. And the other part of it is, I think, from our perspective when it comes to pricing, and again, because we're working on Beauharnois, Marc, you're also in a position to talk about this. We compare ourselves to the other availabilities, the other product that's out there. And our pricing it's not like somebody's saying, oh my God, it's more expensive to be in a Rosefellow building because it's net zero. That's not the case. We are very competitive when it comes to our pricing. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the bang for the buck is there and that the tenant sees the value add in having buildings that are net zero, but at a cost that is comparable to what you would find for standard product.
Well, look, I would actually even go further and say, the Rosefellow buildings in Beauharnois are cheaper than the competition, because not only are we priced at market rates, but because we're offering the carbon net zero certified and getting a 46% reduction in energy, we're actually cheaper.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. And I think that's the message that we're trying to spread, right? Is from Rosefellow's perspective, this is important. It's here to stay. We are seeing it across the board. And, I'd also be interested in seeing, because obviously you're in touch with not just local tenants, but you're also speaking to tenants that are from abroad. Where do you see this kind of trend in the United States right now, Marc?
So it's difficult to answer that question today, because I think we saw probably in the previous administration, which was more conducive to environmental policy. Today's new administration, which is, at this point only weeks old, has a completely different view. And I think that we've seen some of the major companies have even shifted how their policies in regarding to ESG have changed under this administration. So I can tell you that, as I mentioned before, is that there is definitely a demand coming from the larger Fortune 500 type companies in regards to how they want to have their carbon impact on their buildings. But right now, it's the unknown. We don't know if that's going to continue. I believe it's going to continue, because at the end of the day, just because you've got a shift in policy or a shift in administration, that doesn't mean that you're going to change your entire company philosophy. And I think that the employees want to be working for good corporate citizens, and I think that is going to continue, and I think that we'll continue to have the demand for these types of properties. But I think at the end of the day, everybody wants to be a good corporate citizen, but you're also running a business. And what we've seen with these initiatives that Rosefellow has put together, and other builders and other developers, is that it's actually cheaper. In the long run, if you look at your total occupancy cost, it's actually cheaper. So why would you not want to go or push towards that type of initiative?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Mark. And I think the fact on top of it, regardless of the administration, the bank's position on lending and so on, and the institutional investors are expecting this type of product. So regardless of the political landscape, I don't see this going away because of the fact that you have obviously the purse strings with the banks and the institutional investors that are requiring this. And I think that also comes because of the fact of what you just mentioned. People want to be working for good corporate citizens, and there is a value to that. So there's this whole circular effect, which basically trends to the position that these buildings are here to stay, and that they will become increasingly the norm. And I do think that there's a value in organizations being able to look and say, okay, we're moving. A move is not easy, right? We do it every day, where we negotiate with tenants where, in my case, I'm trying to get tenants to move out of their existing product to come into our new product. That process, when you put yourself in the shoes of the occupant, is no fun, right? It's not
absolutely.
It's not
easy. It's expensive.
Easy.
It's disruptive to your business.
And if you're going to do it, you want to do it right. And you want to do it for not the short term, you want to do it for the longer term. And that means that it forces users to look at it not just for what's going to be good for me next year, but what's good for me over the next 10 or 15 years. Agreed. And so on and so forth. And then I think when you look at that longer landscape, it becomes a no-brainer where you say, okay, guys, we're going to save money. We're going to do this move. We're not going to have to move again after this. We're getting everything that we need. And on top of it, we're in a building that's going to remain at the at the peak of technology for the foreseeable future. So from that, I would be interested to see, nobody has a crystal ball, but I am interested to see where you see this going over the next 5 to 10 years. We talked about the evolution from, call it 15 years ago, and to where we are today, and how the demand is increasing for this type of product. Where do you see it moving forward?
Well, look, there's definitely been a flight to quality in our market. Rosefellow being a developer and putting up brand new buildings rather than owning existing facilities, you're seeing it because a lot of the tenants that are moving to your buildings are moving out of older facilities or looking to upgrade, looking to get better clear heights, newer buildings, new energy efficient buildings. I don't have any tenants that we've worked with that have said, hey, Marc, I'd like to move to a more polluting building, please. No one is asking for that. No one wants to really move towards, to downgrade their facility. It's really a matter of how do we upgrade our facility? How do we make our environment better for our employees? Nobody wants to work in a dingy warehouse where there's no sunlight. And, so there's a move towards that. I think companies, and especially given the lack of labor that we've faced over the last 5 years, I think that there's also a move to make the working environment much more pleasant, whether it be in a manufacturing plant, whether it be in a warehouse or an office space. There's just that move, that flight to quality. So I can't see how we're going to roll back, and I still say that a lot of it has to do with cost. And that's the message we need to get to tenants, saying, hey, you're moving into a much better building, but overall your occupancy costs are going to be better, and your productivity is likely going to be better also, having your employees working in better environments.
To add to that, Marc, there's also going to be a continual improvement in standards. For example, Quebec implemented a new energy code a couple years ago. Carbon Zero right now is on version 4. As technology advances, the codes and the standards are going to follow and become more and more strict.
Interesting.
It is interesting. So Marc, we talked a little bit about our neighbors to the south.
Sure.
Let's talk about home base.
Right.
Let's talk about Canada. Where do you see this? We do not have a new administration yet, but we will have some form of new political landscape coming up in the not too distant future. But my sense is that this is not going to change regardless of that. What do you think? What are you seeing in Canada?
Look, I think. Look, I'm Canadian. We're all Canadian here. A very proud Canadian, and the environment is extremely important to me. And I've been in the industrial real estate for 20 years, and I've seen all kinds of stuff in our industry. So, to see the move towards better, cleaner buildings is fantastic. And I think it's really an important part of the industrial real estate market, but also for society. And I don't see in Canada any type of rollback on policy. David, you mentioned that we may have a change of administration. Like our prime minister, is going to be stepping down, so we are going to get some form of a change in leadership, whether that be the current party or another party. I think that we need to be responsibly monetizing some of our resources in Canada. We've been very dependent on the U.S., and I think we're seeing that over the last couple of weeks, how that's come to affect us. And I think Canadians feel the same way. I mean, the difference is that I don't think Canadians want to say, well, let's get rid of all regulations and just like dig. That's not the Canadian way. I think the Canadian way is to say, okay, we've gotten a bit of a step back. We've seen that we've been very dependent on one client, and we need to diversify. And I think that that's what's going to happen going forward. I think we're going to be diversifying in how we do business. I think we're going to be opening up new markets. I think it's going to be very beneficial in the long term for Canada because, we are Canadians. We do business our way. We're not Americans. I do a ton of business with Americans. I love Americans. But we're not Americans, and we do business our way. And I think that is going to really stick in the industrial market, in the industrial real estate market, and with occupiers. Occupiers are going to have the same type of philosophy that, we want to have the big, shiny, new carbon zero building. Why wouldn't you? There's no reason to not want it.
There's no reason. Aside from, you do have certain landlords that don't benefit from owning newer product who are going to say, hey, it just costs more expensive. And that is something that matters to Canadians. But I also feel that socially, across the board, it's more of I do believe that the Canadian society in general is more in tune, or should I say more sensitive to the impacts of or to the environment. So I think that you ask the average person, they think it's a great initiative. And then, like I said, and like you said, Marc, it's really up to us to make sure that all the occupiers of space know that this is to their benefit as well, that it's not just, we're going for a nice plaque on the wall that says that we're environmentally friendly. There's a real material impact on their gross occupancy, which does create a win-win, which at the end of the day has always been Rosefellow's philosophy, right? Make this good for everybody. And we do build buildings that are good for everyone. We absorb the additional cost, although it is not as significant as a lot of people think. It is there, but it has become a part of our DNA to say we need to price ourselves accordingly, not to demonstrate that there is a premium associated, but actually that the tenants are going to be able to benefit. And that's, bringing it back to Beauharnois, which is what we were talking about earlier. We're very, very proud of this project and the ability that we have to be super competitive and bring added value to our tenants that they won't find in other traditional buildings or even new buildings that haven't been built to the same standard.
Well, look, there's no campus like existing right now on the island. Or on the island, off the island, in the greater Montreal area, that size category with that quality of building, with those clear heights and with the carbon net zero. I mean, it's a fantastic project. I think it's going to get emulated. I think we're going to see more and more of that style of campus building. So we're looking forward to putting in somebody with their new home there.
So are we. Brian, Marc, thank you very much. I think that this was a very insightful discussion. We were very, very excited to see how the future of Rosefellow progresses with these environmental standards in mind, and looking forward to sharing more and more about Beauharnois and the evolution of that project moving forward. Thank you guys for taking the time out of your busy schedule to educate our listeners.
Thank
you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen and join us on our latest Rosefellow podcast. Looking forward to seeing you soon.